Section 49 of Villette by Charlotte Bronte. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Leanne Fortune, Section 49. After all this amiability, the reader will be sorry for my sake to hear that I was quarrelling with Monsieur Paul again before night, yet so it was, and I could not help it. It was his occasional custom, and a very laudable, acceptable custom too, to arrive of an evening, always à l'improviste, unannounced, burst in on the silent hour of study, establish a sudden despotism over us and our occupations, cause books to be put away, work-bags to be brought out, and drawing forth a single thick volume, or a handful of pamphlets, substitute for the besotted lecture pews, drawled by a sleepy pupil, some tragedy made grand by grand reading, ardent by fiery action, some drama whereof, for my part, I rarely studied the intrinsic merit, for Monsieur Emmanuel made it a vessel for an outpouring, and filled it with his native verve and passion like a cup with a vital brewage. Or else he would flash through our conventional darkness a reflex of a brighter world, show us a glimpse of the current literature of the day, read us passages from some enchanting tale, or the last witty feuilleton which had awakened laughter in the saloons of Paris, taking care always to expunge with the severest hand, whether from tragedy, melodrama, tale, or essay, whatever passage, phrase, or word could be deemed unsuited to an audience of Genville. I noticed more than once that where retrenchment without substitute would have left unmeaning vacancy, or introduced weakness, he could, and did, improvise whole paragraphs, no less vigorous than irreproachable. The dialogue, the description, he engrafted was often far better than that he pruned away. Well, on the evening in question, we were sitting silent as nuns in a retreat, the pupils studying, the teachers working. I remember my work. It was a slight matter of fancy, and it rather interested me. It had a purpose. I was not doing it merely to kill time. I meant it when finished as a gift, and the occasion of presentation being near, haste was requisite, and my fingers were busy. We heard the sharp bell peal which we all knew, then the rapid step familiar to each ear. The words "Voilà, monsieur," had scarcely broken simultaneously from every lip, when the two-leaved door split, as split it always did for his admission. Such a slow word as "open" is inefficient to describe his movements, and he stood in the midst of us. There were two study tables, both long and flanked with benches. Over the centre of each hung a lamp. Beneath this lamp, on either side the table, sat a teacher. The girls were arranged to the right hand and the left, the eldest and most studious nearest the lamps or tropics, the idlers and little ones towards the north and south poles. Monsieur's habit was politely to hand a chair to some teacher, generally Zélie St. Pierre, the senior mistress, then to take her vacated seat, and thus avail himself of the full beam of Cancer or Capricorn which, owing to his near sight, he needed. As usual, Zélie rose with alacrity, smiling to the whole extent of her mouth, and the full display of her upper and under rows of teeth, that strange smile which passes from ear to ear, and is marked only by a sharp thin curve, which fails to spread over the countenance, and neither dimples the cheek nor lights the eye. I suppose Monsieur did not see her, or he had taken a whim that he would not notice her, for he was as capricious as women are said to be. Then his lunettes, he had got another pair, served him as an excuse for all sorts of little oversights and shortcomings. Whatever might be his reason, he passed by Zélie, came to the other side of the table, and before I could start up to clear the way, whispered, "Ne bougez pas," and established himself between me and Miss Fanshawe, who always would be my neighbour, and have her elbow in my side, however often I declared to her, "Ginevra, I wish you were at Jericho." It was easy to say, "Ne bougez pas," but how could I help it? I must make him room, and I must request the pupils to recede that I might recede. It was very well for Ginevra to be gummed to me, keeping herself warm, as she said, on the winter evenings, and harassing my very heart with her fidgetings and pokings, obliging me, indeed, sometimes to put an artful pin in my girdle by way of protection against her elbow. But I suppose Monsieur Emmanuel was not to be subjected to the same kind of treatment, so I swept away my working materials to clear space for his book, and withdrew myself to make room for his person, not, however, leaving more than a yard of interval, just what any reasonable man would have regarded as a convenient, respectful allowance of bench. But Monsieur Emmanuel never was reasonable. Flint and tinder that he was, he struck and took fire directly. "Vous ne voulez pas de moi pour voisin?" he growled. "Vous donnez des airs de caste. Vous me traitez en pareil," he scowled. "Soit, je vais arranger la chose." And he set to work. "Levez-vous tous, mesdemoiselles," cried he. The girls rose. He made them all file off to the other table. He then placed me at one extremity of the long bench, and having duly and carefully brought me my work-basket, sulk, scissors, all my implements, he fixed himself quite at the other end. At this arrangement, highly absurd as it was, not a soul in the room dared to laugh. Luckless, for the giggler would have been the giggle. As for me, I took it with entire coolness. There I sat, isolated and cut off from human intercourse. I sat and minded my work, and was quiet, and not at all unhappy. "Et c'est assez de distance?" he demanded. "Monsieur, on est l'arbitre," said I. "Vous savez bien que non. C'est vous qui avez créé ce vide immense. Moi, je n'y ai pas mis la main." And with this assertion he commenced the reading. For his misfortune he had chosen a French translation of what he called un drame de William's Shakespeare, Le Feu Dieu. He further announced de ces sots païens les Anglais. How far otherwise he would have characterized him had his temper not been upset, I scarcely need intimate. Of course, the translation being French was very inefficient, nor did I make any particular effort to conceal the contempt which some of its forlorn lapses were calculated to excite. Not that it behoved or beseemed me to say anything, but one can occasionally look the opinion it is forbidden to embody in words. Monsieur's lunettes being on the alert, he gleaned up every stray look. I don't think he lost one. The consequence was, his eyes soon discarded a screen, that their blaze might sparkle free, and he waxed hotter at the North Pole, to which he had voluntarily exiled himself, than, considering the general temperature of the room, it would have been reasonable to become under the vertical ray of Cancer itself. The reading over, it appeared problematic whether he would depart with his anger unexpressed, or whether he would give it vent. Suppression was not much in his habits, but still what had been done to him definite enough to afford matter for overt reproof. I had not uttered a sound, and could not justly be deemed amenable to reprimand or penalty for having permitted a slightly freer action than usual to the muscles about my eyes and mouth. The supper, consisting of bread and milk diluted with tepid water, was brought in. In respectful consideration of the Professor's presence, the rolls and glasses were allowed to stand instead of being immediately handed round. "Take your supper, ladies," said he, seeming to be occupied in making marginal notes to his William's Shakespeare. They took it. I also accepted a roll and glass, But being now more than ever interested in my work, I kept my seat of punishment, and wrought while I munched my bread and sipped my beverage, the whole with easy sang-froid, with a certain snugness of composure, indeed scarcely in my habits, and pleasantly novel to my feelings. It seemed as if the presence of a nature so restless, chafing, thorny as that of Monsieur Paul absorbed all feverish and unsettling influences like a magnet, and left me none but such as were placid and harmonious. He rose. Will he go away without saying another word? Yes, he turned to the door. No, he returned on his steps, but only perhaps to take his pencil case, which had been left on the table. He took it, shut the pencil in and out, broke its point against the wood, recut and pocketed it, and walked promptly up to me. The girls and teachers, gathered round the other table, were talking pretty freely. They always talked at meals, and from the constant habit of speaking fast and loud at such times, did not now subdue their voices much. Monsieur Paul came and stood behind me. He asked at what I was working, and I said I was making a watchguard. He asked, for whom? And I answered, for a gentleman, one of my friends. Monsieur Paul stooped down and proceeded, as novel writers say, and as was literally true in his case, to hiss into my ear some poignant words. He said that, of all the women he knew, I was the one who could make herself the most consummately unpleasant. I was she with whom it was least possible to live on friendly terms. I had a caractère intraitable, and perverse to a miracle. How I managed it, or what possessed me, he for his part did not know, but with whatever pacific and amicable intentions a person accosted me, crack! I turned concord to discord, goodwill to enmity. He was sure, Monsieur Paul, wished me well enough. He had never done me any harm that he knew of. He might, at least, he supposed, claim a right to be regarded as a neutral acquaintance, guiltless of hostile sentiments. Yet how I behaved to him, with what pungent vivacities, what an impetus of mutiny, what a vogue of injustice! Here I could not avoid opening my eyes somewhat wide, and even slipping in a slight interjectional observation. Vivacities? Impetus? Vogue? I didn't know. Chou, à l'instant. There I went. Vive comme la poudre. He was sorry, he was very sorry. For my sake he grieved over the hapless peculiarity. This emportement, this chaleur, generous perhaps, but excessive, would yet, he feared, do me a mischief. It was a pity. I was not, he believed in his soul, wholly without good qualities, and would I but hear reason, and be more sedate, more sober, less en l'air, less coquette, less taken by show, less prone to set an undue value on outside excellence, to make much of the attentions of people remarkable chiefly for so many feet of stature, des couleurs de poupée, un nez plus ou moins bien fait, and an enormous amount of fatuity, I might yet prove an useful, perhaps an exemplary, character. But as it was, and here the little man's voice was for a minute choked, I would have looked up at him, or held out my hand, or said a soothing word, but I was afraid, if I stirred, I should either laugh or cry. So odd in all this was the mixture of the touching and the absurd. I thought he had nearly done, but no, he sat down that he might go on at his ease. While he, Monsieur Paul, was on these painful topics, he would dare my anger for the sake of my good, and would venture to refer to a change he had noticed in my dress. He was free to confess that when he first knew me, or rather was in the habit of catching a passing glimpse of me from time to time, I satisfied him on this point. The gravity, the austere simplicity, obvious in this particular, were such as to inspire the highest hopes for my best interests. What fatal influence had impelled me lately to introduce flowers under the brim of my bonnet, to wear décolleté broads, and even to appear on one occasion in a scarlet gown, he might indeed conjecture, but for the present would not openly declare. Again I interrupted, and this time not without an accent at once indignant and horror-struck. Scarlet, Monsieur Paul! It was not scarlet, it was pink, and pale pink too, and further subdued by black lace. Pink or scarlet, yellow or crimson, pea green or sky blue, it was all one. These were all flaunting, giddy colours, and as to the lace I talked of, that was but a colifichet de plus. And he sighed over my degeneracy. He could not, he was sorry to say, be so particular on this theme as he could wish, not possessing the exact names of these babioles. He might run into small verbal errors, which would not fail to lay him open to my sarcasm, and excite my unhappily sudden and passionate disposition. He would merely say in general terms, and in these general terms he knew he was correct, that my costume had of late assumed des facons mondains, which it wounded him to see. What facons mondains he discovered in my present winter merino and plain white collar, I own it puzzled me to guess, and when I asked him, he said it was all made with too much attention to effect, and besides, had I not a bow of ribbon at my neck? And if you condemn a bow of ribbon for a lady, monsieur, you would necessarily disapprove of a thing like this for a gentleman? Holding up my bright little chainlet of silk and gold, his sole reply was a groan, I suppose, over my levity. After sitting some minutes in silence, and watching the progress of the chain, at which I now wrought more assiduously than ever, he inquired whether what he had just said would have the effect of making me entirely detest him. I hardly remember what answer I made, or how it came about. I don't think I spoke at all, but I know we managed to bid good night on friendly terms, and even after Monsieur Paul had reached the door, he turned back just to explain that he would not be understood to speak in entire condemnation of the scarlet dress. Pink, pink, I threw in, that he had no intention to deny it the merit of looking rather well. The fact was, Monsieur Emmanuel's taste in colours decidedly leaned to the brilliant. Only he wished to counsel me, whenever I wore it, to do so in the same spirit as if its material were bleu, and its hue gris de poussière. "And the flowers under my bonnet, monsieur?" I asked. "They are very little ones." "Keep them little then," said he. "Permit them not to become full-blown. And the bow, monsieur, the bit of ribbon?" "Va pour les rubans," was the propitious answer. And so we settled it. "Well done, Lucy Snowe!" cried I to myself. "You have come in for a pretty lecture, brought on yourself a rude savant, and all through your wicked fondness for worldly vanities. Who would have thought it? You deemed yourself a melancholy sober sides enough. Miss Fanshawe there regards you as a second Diogenes. Monsieur de Bassompierre, the other day, politely turned the conversation when it ran on the wild gifts of the actress Vashti, because, as he kindly said, Miss Snowe looked uncomfortable. Dr. John Bretton knows you only as quiet Lucy, a creature inoffensive as a shadow, he has said, and you have heard him say it. Lucy's disadvantages spring from over-gravity in tastes and manner, want of colour in character and costume. Such are your own and your friends' impressions, and behold, there starts up a little man, differing diametrically from all these, roundly charging you with being too airy and cheery, too volatile and versatile, too flowery and coloury. This harsh little man, this pitiless censor, gathers up all your poor scattered sins of vanity, your luckless chiffon of rose colour, your small fringe of a wreath, your small scrap of ribbon, your silly bit of lace, and calls you to account for the lot, and for each item. You are well habituated to be passed by as a shadow in life's sunshine. It is a new thing to see one testily lifting his hand to screen his eyes, because you tease him with an unobtrusive ray. End of section 49. Recording by Leanne Fortune.